In the heart of the 1970s, Illinois powered America with 1 out of every 8 U.S. factory workers. Union contracts promising a future as solid as its steel mills and corn yields rising by 20%. But beneath these steady routines, change was brewing, threatening jobs, uprooting neighborhoods, and challenging everything that made life here feel predictable. What really happened to daily life when stability was the promise and the cracks first appeared? Steel towers rose above the Chicago skyline, each floor of the new record-tall building completed in 1973, adding to the city's sense of permanence. From the Loop, the steady clatter of commuter trains echoed toward the stockyards and the sprawl of rail lines that carried a quarter of the nation's freight. At shift change, thousands of men and women streamed through factory gates, lunch pails in hand, boots caked with dust, joining the flow of over 1.2 million manufacturing jobs that powered Illinois at its peak in 1974. On the south side, smokestacks from U.S. Steel, Southworks and Republic Steel painted the horizon gray. Neighborhoods pressed against the mill fences, where the whistle signaled the start of a shift and the end of a night. Inside, the rhythm was set by the punch clock. 8 hours on the blast furnace, then a walk home past corner bars and union halls. For many, a job on the line meant more than a paycheck. Union contracts covering as many as 40% of industrial workers promised overtime pay, health coverage, and the hope of a pension. It was understood, steady work could buy a bungalow, send kids to college, and retire a worker with dignity. The city's arteries pulsed with movement. Freight trains rolled through Calumet yards, boxcars marked for St. Louis or Detroit. Grain elevators near Decatur loaded corn bound for distant ports, linking rural fields to the city's industrial heart. Early mornings saw crowds boarding the Chicago and Northwestern, newspapers folded under arms, faces set for the day ahead. The hum of engines, the clang of machinery, the union shop steward's clipboard. These shaped the daily tempo. Confidence ran deep in these routines. The skyline's new crown, the endless freight, and the punch clock's certainty all pointed toward a future that felt unshakable. In neighborhoods from Bridgeport to Blue Island, families measured time by the blast of the factory whistle and the promise that tomorrow's shift would always be waiting. For a generation, this was the rhythm of Illinois, predictable, proud, and built to last. Weekend mornings in the new suburbs brought a different kind of bustle. On the edge of former cornfields, families steered station wagons toward Woodfield Mall, which opened its doors in September 1971. The mall's spiral walkways and 3 towering anchor stores became a magnet for shoppers from Schaumburg, Palatine, and beyond. Teenagers circled the central court, drawn to the movie theaters and fountains, while parents browsed racks at Sears or Marshall Fields. Woodfield's 1.9 million square feet and 10,000 parking spots signaled a new era of suburban routine, pulling crowds away from downtown State Street and changing how families spent their Saturdays. School bells set the tempo for daily life in neighborhoods from Decatur to Deerfield. Public schools stood at the center of community identity, hosting everything from band concerts to science fairs. In 1977, the girls' basketball team at Decatur St. Teresa Academy clinched the regional title, packing the bleachers and igniting hometown pride. Title IX, signed into law just a few years earlier, had opened the gym doors to girls' teams across Illinois. Young athletes in polyester uniforms practiced free throws under banners that, for the first time, listed their names alongside the boys. Friday nights belonged to football games, where marching bands and booster clubs filled the stands, and the whole town turned out under the lights. Beyond the city limits, the rhythm of the seasons shaped life for farm families. Central Illinois fields near Decatur and Champaign yielded 1/5 of the nation's corn and soybeans. By the late 1970s, new combines and hybrid seeds pushed yields up by 20%. Still, the promise of a good harvest came with a warning. Fuel and fertilizer bills soared in 1978, and farm loans tripled, leaving some families uneasy as they gathered in kitchen nooks after dusk. The radio played commodity prices alongside weather reports, and parents weighed the cost of next year's planting against the hope that steady land and hard work would carry them through. From mall corridors to high school gyms, from suburban kitchens to rural fields, Illinois communities built their own sense of steadiness. Traditions, old and new, tied people together, even as the first hints of strain appeared on the horizon. The state's identity thrived in these everyday places, where routine offered comfort and belonging, and where families quietly wondered how long the good years would last. October 1979 brought a shock to South Chicago. The news broke at a press conference. U.S. Steel Southworks would cut 13,000 positions, the largest layoff in the plant's long history. The announcement landed with the force of a punch. Union Hall phones rang off the hook as workers tried to make sense of what was next. Some had spent decades on the blast furnaces, counting on the mill for their children's futures. Now, questions outnumbered answers. Governor Dan Walker's office scrambled to respond. They rolled out a 39-week extended unemployment program and promised $200 million in emergency aid. But for many, these measures felt thin compared to the scale of loss. On Commercial Avenue, the impact was immediate. Bars that once filled up after every shift saw business drop by 20%, almost overnight. Owners like Tom, who had poured drinks for steelworkers since the Johnson administration, watched regulars disappear. He told a reporter that nights are quiet now, glancing at empty stools. Down the block, storefronts posted "For lease" signs where hardware stores and diners had stood for years. By nightfall, the neighborhood felt different. Men who once traded jokes after work now lingered outside the Union Hall, clutching pink slips. Some talked about heading to Gary or Joliet for work. Others talked about holding on and hoping the mill would call them back. For families whose lives revolved around the rhythm of the plant, the future no longer felt certain. The heart of South Chicago had skipped a beat, and the shockwaves were only beginning to spread. State Street once drew crowds so thick you had to elbow your way past the windows at Marshall Fields. By 1975, the sidewalks had thinned. Retail sales downtown dropped by nearly 40% as shoppers flocked to new suburban malls. A clerk behind the perfume counter watched regulars vanish, their Saturday routines replaced by car rides out to Woodfield or Oak Brook. For small shops along the Loop, every empty display meant another bill unpaid. Downstate, the pressure mounted in farm country. In 1979, the average loan for a corn or soybean farm near Decatur ballooned to $150,000. Bankers called in notes as fuel costs climbed and crop prices wobbled. At the kitchen table, a farmer scanned the ledger, calculating whether this year's harvest would cover the debt. The radio played market reports, but the numbers offered little comfort. Neighbors who once traded seed now compared interest rates and worried about foreclosure. On a cold February evening in 1977, the city's nerves were tested in a different way. Rush-hour commuters packed the elevated trains circling the loop. At 5:15 in the afternoon, 2 CTA trains collided at the Wabash and Polk station. 11 people died, and 200 more were injured in the tangled wreckage. For those who rode the L every day, the crash shattered the sense of safety that came with routine. The headlines lingered for weeks. Riders glanced up at signals and wondered if the system, like so much else, was running on borrowed time. From shuttered storefronts to rising farm debt and the chaos of a train disaster, the old certainties of Illinois life began to fray. The cracks ran through city and countryside alike, leaving shopkeepers, farmers, and commuters to face questions that hadn't been asked in a generation. Today, Illinois holds only half as many manufacturing jobs as in the 1970s. The routines that once defined the state now feel fragile nationwide. When stability fades, what remains are the choices communities make next. The Midwest's story isn't in the past, it's being written every day. Thanks for watching.